In Italy, authorities say that 14 people have now died in the devastating floods which have submerged parts of the Emilia Romagna region. Over 10,000 people have been evacuated from their homes there, and many are calling on the government to do more to mitigate the human cost of these sorts of natural disasters, as the country grapples with the worst flooding in a century. Well, for more on the situation on the ground, we can speak to our correspondent in Italy, Seema Gupta. Seema, hi. After a couple of days of very severe flooding, can we say that the situation has stabilised somewhat? What's the situation there now?
Unfortunately, this catastrophic flooding really, as you mentioned, has claimed now 14 lives. But overnight, even though the rain stopped briefly, the waters continue to rise. And we saw flooding in towns around the Ravenna area, forcing even more evacuations. So now we understand more than 15,000 people have been forced to leave their homes. They've been bussed out of the area and brought to various shelters. Some of them getting shelter now in hotels, in schools, in sports halls. They're just trying to get some space to remain dry. The Civil Protection Services have said that more than 40 towns in this region of Italy up north have been affected, and more than 250 landslides have been reported, and there are concerns about more to come. The landslides, of course, creating even further problems because that blocks the roads that leads to smaller towns and villages in the area, which makes it difficult to reach them. Now, the problem at the moment, though, is that there are towns without electricity as well as phone or mobile phone access. It's returning in some areas in a patchy way, but not everywhere. And the main concern at the moment is the weather. The rain has started again, and they expect the rain to become even more intense on Saturday. At least that's what's been forecast.
Well, indeed, Italy had to deal with this extremely dramatic situation in a very short period of time. Tell us a bit more about the response so far.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, just to give you a bit of context, you had essentially half the year's annual rainfall that hits that area landing there in a day and a half. So it was just the sheer amount of water in an area that also experienced drought for many months. So the drought made the land very dry, unable to absorb the water, and the rivers essentially overflowed. Now, hundreds of firefighters have been deployed. They've been helping the elderly, little children. The waters in some areas have receded, but the people there are now dealing with the immense cleanup because you've got rubbish, an intense amount of mud, businesses, the agricultural sector in this area very much affected. The governor of the region of Emilia Romagna says that it will cost in the billions. The Farming Association has already said in terms of the agriculture sector that's some 1.5 billion euros in terms of cost, not just to crops, it's also animals and livestock that have been affected. And of course, the tourist season that's supposed to be coming up soon will also have a knock-on effect. Now, the volunteers are really coming out in full force to help those that need the help most, to help with cleaning up. Donations also coming forward with people trying to help in any which way they can. Next Tuesday, the government has scheduled an cabinet meeting that will really focus on this emergency. They expect to grant a state of emergency, and that's going to put a pause in terms of people's mortgage and tax payments, and also free up much needed money to deal with this disaster. The Civil Protection Minister making it very clear that perhaps Italy needs to have a rethink in terms of how it manages floodwaters, because the waters that we're seeing right now, the rains that we're seeing in recent years, have been more like tropical storms, which the current situation on the ground is not ready to deal with. And so he suggested that perhaps they need to rethink the thing in terms of the engineering and the structure on the ground.
Thank you very much, Seema Gupta, there, reporting for us from Italy.